And so I would say the lack of housing policy in this budget and in the budget before that and in the budget before that, going back to the 1990s, is a disgrace, and that we need to address it urgently.
I think we're just about before 2 o'clock, so I think we'll get started with members' statements. Déclaration de député. The Honourable Member for Hamilton East, Stoney Creek.
Mr. Speaker, as with all Canadians, the residents of Hamilton East Stoney Creek stand in solidarity with the people of Fort McMurray. I've been moved by statements made by members in the House regarding this terrible situation, and in particular a statement by the member from Mégantic-L'Érable, whose residents know better than most the experience of a catastrophic event. A Hamilton firefighter, Scott DeJager, learned that Lac-Mégantic's fire department lost a vehicle in the conflagration, and Hamilton had a surplus ladder truck. It was fully outfitted by the fire department and donated to Lac-Mégantic. The Deputy Mayor, Daniel Gendron, had tears in his eyes when he received the keys in Hamilton. In the days and weeks ahead, Mr. Speaker, we will be gaining a better understanding of the needs of Fort McMurray, and I urge all three levels of government and citizens to pay careful attention to messaging from the Mayor and other responders regarding the specific needs of Fort McMurray, and then, of course, all of us donate where possible. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rivière du Nord. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on April 19th, Mr. Lucien G. Roland, a pioneer who marked the history of Saint-Jérôme, died at the age of 99. He was awarded the Officer of the Order of Canada in 1984. The Roland family is very well known in Saint-Jérôme and also in Saint-Adèle and throughout the Laurentians and beyond the region. One day or another, everyone here has either written or printed something on the Roland Company's premier paper. Lucien Roland started working in 1947 in the family company founded in 1882. He followed in the footsteps of his great-grandfather, his grandfather, and his father, and he went through the ranks up to the top of the company in 1992. And this, of course, was Roland Paper. It's a great Quebec company that has marked the history of pulp and paper across North America. I'd like to remind everyone that Mr. Roland was also very much involved in his community through the many social, humanitarian, cultural initiatives he loved. He provided an extraordinary contribution to our industrial development. I salute his commitment to the community, and on behalf of the Bloc Québécois and me, I wanted to offer my sincerest condolences to his family and to the loved ones of this great man from Saint-Jérôme. The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. Mr. Speaker, on the weekend I participated in a very touching activity when Deauville paid a brilliant tribute to Roxane Rayo, a figure skater. She also, at the time, announced her retirement from competition and the start of her new career on a luxurious cruise ship, the largest in the world, in fact, the Harmony of the Seas. She said, "People who travel learn a great deal, but people often say as well that the greatest travelers need to go down a path of self-discovery." With a quote like that, we certainly can understand how mature this young 21-year-old woman is. A true model for Canadians, Roxane has made her mark on many occasions, winning provincial and national championships, and in 2015, she won a place on the prestigious national figure skating team. She is a source of inspiration for all young athletes in my riding. Congratulations, Roxane, and have a successful future career.
Mr. Speaker, the communities of Jane and Finch are some of the warmest and most culturally vibrant places in Canada. But times are tough for my constituents. A decade under the thumb of a government putting politics before people has clearly cut deep. Conservatives held back on spending, stalled social programming, slashed integration services, ignored job creation needs, and denied help to families, students, seniors, and the unemployed. This hurtful and divisive approach took a toll on all of our communities, and people in my riding felt the pinch. Well, this government has taken a people-focused approach, and we are already seeing changes. Increased Canada Summer Jobs funding, financial help for families with children, and a restoration of the retirement age are steps that put people first. This is a government that's clearly putting people first. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. Mr. Speaker, like elsewhere, unfortunately, my riding too faces acts of homophobia that are of unprecedented violence. On April 30th, the homosexual couple was a victim of a physical assault outside a bar in Hochelaga Maisonneuve. Walking hand in hand, they were violently struck for having kissed in public. I was very proud of the kiss in operation that took place last night, where near to the place where these young men were attacked. Hundreds of people came in to show their support, and it was an admirable response faced with this type of hatred. Over the past 18 months, Gay Écoute has identified some 1,000 acts of homophobia, including 43% that are allegedly of a criminal nature. Although the LGBTQ rights are entrenched, social recognition is far from being won. We need to remain together and show our solidarity on these issues.
Montreal's West Island has lost a woman of peace and principle who was committed to social justice in all its forms. Joan Hadrill lived by the motto, "Think globally, act locally." Joan was instrumental in founding WIND, West Islanders for Nuclear Disarmament, and the Montreal chapter of the Raging Grannies. She was a hands-on advocate, selling fair trade coffee and crafts at local events, activities that ultimately led to the establishment of 10 000 Villages, a West Island fair trade retail outlet. For her lifetime of service, Joan received numerous awards, including a doctorate in divinity from McGill University, as well as the Quebec Lieutenant Governor's Seniors Medal. Joan combined principle, resolve, and a faith-based dedication to making the world a better place with a grace and civility that could not help make you want to join in and try to do the same. To Joan's children, Jeff, David, Leslie, and Julia, and to their families, we offer our deepest condolences for a life well lived in the service of family and community.
Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, our conservative record on maternal and newborn child health is a record of which I am extremely proud. All pregnant women and their unborn babies need access to care during pregnancy, skilled care during childbirth, and care for support in the weeks after childbirth. Today, Uju Ekocho of Nigeria is visiting Ottawa, and she applauds our initiative. She states, quote, "This is the non-controversial approach that will be welcomed throughout the vast continent of Africa, regardless of region, prevalent religion, tribe, clan, and socioeconomic status. The most precious gift that Africans give to the world at this point in history is our inherent culture of life. Most Africans understand by faith and tradition the inestimable value of human life, the beauty of womanhood, the grace of motherhood, and the blessing of married life." End quote. Uju is well qualified to speak to this. As a biomedical scientific specialist in England, she has a passion for preserving and promoting the African culture of life. She is an extraordinary woman who is doing extraordinary work. Welcome to Canada, Uju.
The honourable member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to recognize members of the Canadian Cable Systems Alliance who are in Ottawa today talking about important issues related to telecommunications policy in Canada. CCSA represents more than 115 independent communications companies serving Canadians from coast to coast to coast. They connect Canadians to information, entertainment, and other critical services. They are cooperatives, family businesses, rural companies, First Nation bands, and entrepreneurs providing service to Canadians generally outside urban markets across the country. These are companies that invest in their communities, they provide jobs and sponsor local events. The government has announced $500 million in a recent budget for investments in rural broadband services to help connect millions of Canadians that lack the access to services many of us in this chamber take for granted. We look forward to working with CCSA and its members and as we roll out this program in the coming years. Thank you.
Member for Northwest Territories.
Mr. Speaker, today is the last day of the Honourable George Tuckerew's term as Commissioner of Northwest Territories. He was sworn in as the 16th Commissioner in May 2010 and has been a dedicated advocate of youth and healthy lifestyles throughout his term. Prior to his time as Commissioner, he had a long and distinguished career with CBC North Radio. He was the anchor for the current affairs program, Northbeat, and also produced a Gabriel Award-winning documentary on teen suicide in Canada's North. Mr. Tuckerew is a recipient of many awards, including the Canada 125 Commemorative Medal, the National Aboriginal Achievement Award, and both the Queen's Golden and Diamond Jubilee Medals. Mr. Speaker, George Tuckrew spoke at many events and ceremonies. His message was consistent. We have to love ourselves enough to want something better in our lives. On behalf of the people of Northwest Territories, I thank him for his service, wish him luck, and much happiness. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Today, Mr. Speaker, many colleagues of all partisan stripes are wearing yellow roses. We do this to honor the thousands of Canadians afflicted by cystic fibrosis, which remains the #1 killer of young people in this country. Although, happily, great strides are being made to extend the lives of people who have CF. Already, this terrible disease has been transformed from one which kills in early childhood to one which increasingly can be held at bay until middle life. But of course, that is not enough. We must not rest until every CF kid can look forward to living into old age. Why the yellow rose? Well, yellow because it is the color of hope. And a rose because 40 years ago, a little Ontario girl named Heather Summerhays was told that her baby sister Pam had an incurable disease, which Heather could not pronounce. She called it 65 Roses, and her book about Pam's life and death bears this title. Via medical research and proper care, we can ensure that the Pams of today will enjoy long, happy lives. Let us renew our collective commitment to this goal, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Louis-Hébert.
The Honourable Member for Louis-Hébert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On April 28th, I had the pleasure of participating in the 4th edition of the Société Saint-Vincent de Paul de Québec Benefit Evening. It's a great organization that has gathered up over $106,000 to help the most underprivileged people over 165 years, and there's a dedication of over 800 volunteers. Mr. Speaker, these volunteers are people that I meet on a daily basis in Saint-Jean-Baptiste, Saint-Geneviève, Saint-Notre-Dame-de-Foy, Saint-Benoît, Saint-Charles-Garnier, people like Leda Bouchard, who held down the fort at the food bank in Notre-Dame-des-Foy for 15 years, people who have a sense of conscience, their heart is filled, and they work very hard to help people every day, Mr. Speaker. It makes me think that each time I come back to Ottawa, Mr. Speaker, I realize that I have the best riding.
Member for Brave Quinte.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to proudly pay special tribute to the organizers of the Butterfly Run, an event designed to support those who have experienced the devastating loss of an infant or child. Close to $70,000 was raised. All money will be donated to the Pediatric Bereavement Fund at Quinte Healthcare. I personally want to thank 3 remarkable women, Barb, Laura Lee, and Beth, not only for their organization of this event, but also for your strength, your compassion, and for your sharing of your own personal experiences. Our Butterfly Girls have transformed grief and loss into a positive action and inspired an entire community. As MP for the Bay of Quinte, I stand today to honor baby Charlie Mae McFadden and to remember all the infants and children that we have lost, but we will never forget. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Brandon Souris.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the new Premier of Manitoba, Brian Pallister, and the entire Progressive Conservative team forming a new government on April the 19th. In particular, I'd like to highlight the PC team set new modern records by winning 40 of 57 seats in the House and 53% of the popular vote. From across our great province, my former colleagues in the Manitoba Legislature won resounding pluralities and will soon be joined by a new group of MLAs eager to chomp at the bit and get Manitoba back on track. There are many challenges ahead, but I have full confidence that this entire PC team, as they work collectively to improve the lives of Manitobans. And I know that every member of this House wishes the new Pallister administration well as they begin to set out to implement their new plan for a better Manitoba.
The Honourable Member for St. John Rothsay.
Mr. Speaker, economists agree one of the best ways to spur economic growth in St. John Rothsay is the promotion of our rich cultural heritage. I call it the St. John Trail of History. Our city market is the oldest in Canada. The Carlton Martello Tower stood guard over the entrance to what is now Canada since 1813. Fort Latour fell in 1645 after the Battle of St. John, where Lady Latour defended the fortress for 3 days. Partridge Island was named by Samuel de Champlain In 1791, the third Canadian lighthouse was built there, later housing the world's first steam-powered foghorn. We have the Marco Polo. Mr. Speaker, it's important to preserve our shared historical tradition. Developing these sites presents the federal government with a win-win situation. Canadians experience an important part of their history, and my region gets a much-needed economic boost. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, I encourage all Canadians to join us in St. John, New Brunswick this summer and experience its historic landmarks and its wonderful heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to rise in the House to honour outstanding citizens making a difference in Port Moody, Coquitlam, Anmore, and Belcarra. Miranda Anderson, a young environmental filmmaker who raises awareness through social media. Tima Kurdi, whose activism on behalf of Syrian refugees' families has touched the lives around the world. Leon Lebrun, who helped build our community by establishing Festival du Bois, the local Trans-Canada Trail, and the Trails BC network. Sandra Niven for her work at the Port Moody Arts Centre, Port Moody Ecological's Fingerling Festival, and Community Venture Society. Drake Stevens for his years of hard work making our community bear aware. Don Violet, whose work with the Burquitlam Community Association helped establish a community garden and protect environmentally sensitive areas, and George Asaf, whose volunteer work included stream keeping duties and habitat restoration of Port Moody streams. Mr. Speaker, these community heroes are living the change they want to see in the world, and I'm proud to honor them today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The misleading rhetoric and self-glorification of the Liberal cabinet isn't fooling anyone. The Minister of International Trade seems to have convinced herself that it was she alone who resolved the issue of country of origin labeling. However, Canadians are not convinced. They know that it was the former Conservative Agriculture and Trade Ministers who did all of the heavy lifting on these files. While the former Conservative ministers had their priorities straight, promoting Canadian agriculture around the world, the current Minister of Agriculture has lost sight of these priorities. Rather than promoting Canadian interests, the minister has been on a campaign of self-promoting vanity trips costing Canadians over $20,000. The Minister of Trade should halt her partisan and self-admiration and give credit where credit is due. She should pay tribute to her predecessors and get busy doing the work that was left to her, like ratifying the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other trade deals that will vastly improve the lives of farm families across this country.
The honourable member for Longueuil-Charles-Lemoyne.
I'd like to rise in the House today in honour of Cystic Fibrosis Month. During this month, I encourage all of my colleagues to wear a rose to support the thousands of individuals across Canada who are affected by this disease. La fibrose kystique.
Cystic fibrosis is the #1 killer of children and young adults in Canada. It is estimated that 1 out of every 3,600 children born in this country have cystic fibrosis.
Great strides in recent years. Today, 50% of Canadians with cystic fibrosis are expected to live into their early 50s and beyond. C'est très important.
It's very important to make Canadians aware of the situation in order to show people suffering from this disease that we are alongside them.
That was my walk in Washington last March. Oral questions, questions orales. The honourable member for Regina Chapel.
Mr. Speaker, as wildfires in Alberta continue to rage, it appears that 90% of Fort McMurray has been spared, and the brave men and women who helped save that city deserve our thanks and praise. Now the rebuilding will begin, and in addition to aid and infrastructure, the region will need significant investment to ensure that there are jobs to come back to. Will the Liberals stop blocking private sector investment that would cushion the blow and allow pipelines to be built?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I too, in the name of all Canadians, congratulate the brave firefighters and first responders who've been there to do extraordinary work through these terrible blazes in Fort McMurray. I want to congratulate as well all the MPs from all parties, particularly the Leader of the Opposition, who've been very strongly engaged on the ground supporting their fellow citizens. I want to congratulate all Canadians who across the country came together to give incredibly generously to the people of Fort McMurray through the Canadian Red Cross and in other ways. And I'm pleased to confirm, Mr. Speaker, that I will be going personally to Fort McMurray on Friday to offer support for all Canadians.
The honourable member for the Regina Capel.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta has been hit hard by many factors beyond its control. The low price of energy and natural disasters have left thousands out of work. One thing we can control, though, is ensuring that the private sector is able to bounce back. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister has added additional red tape and unnecessary hurdles to pipeline approval projects. His new term, social license, is actually just political license. Can the Prime Minister assure energy workers that he will not allow special interests and politics to block important pipeline projects?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate that after 10 years of failing to get pipelines built at Tidewater, the Conservatives opposite still don't understand that the only way to build pipelines in the 21st century is to demonstrate the community support, the partnership with Indigenous peoples, and the strong science that is going to demonstrate that we understand that environmental protection and economic development go hand in hand. It's not an either-or choice. That's what Canadians have elected us to do, and that is what we're working hard to get done.
Member for Regina Capel.
He keeps forgetting the 4 major pipelines that were approved by this government, and he forgets about the additional political hurdles he's added. Mais au sujet de leur voyage à Washington,
we know that all bilateral meetings are important, including the recent meeting in Washington. What Canadians are concerned about are the Prime Minister's priority. There's a limited number of seats around the table, and the Prime Minister took his fundraisers and his in-laws, but he left his Minister of Natural Resources at home. How are these people more important than his Minister of Natural Resources, the Right Honourable Prime Minister? For 10 years, Mr. Speaker, the former government had only one concern with the United States, and that was pipelines. And unfortunately, that hurt relations with the United States, and our country has suffered economic development, and it has affected the work of our businesses and our entrepreneurs. The reality is that we need to rebuild this relationship. It takes a lot of energy. We have started that effort full force, and I was touched that President Obama personally invited my mother and my in-laws to be part of this great meeting of two families. The Honourable Member for Regina Capel.
Mr. Speaker, nobody believes that President Obama on his own decided to invite the Prime Minister's in-laws. Nobody believes that President Obama on his own decided to invite Liberal Party fundraisers. We know, Canadians know how these kinds of official events work. Does the Prime Minister deny that it was his office that sent the White House the invitation list for this state dinner?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yet again, the party opposite has demonstrated that it has very little understanding for the strong friendship between Canada and the United States. And I can say that on top of the official delegation seats that we were allocated, the President and his office insisted that we add to it my mother and our in-laws, because it emphasizes the relationship. These were extra seats that the President made available, not in the official delegation that we provided.
Our members are enjoying this exchange, but let's make sure that we can all hear, including the Speaker. Let's make sure we can all hear both the questions and the answers, please. The Honourable Member for Regina Capel.
Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister sure that they just added in his in-laws and didn't just drop the natural resource ministers to make it? And, you know, it's not about whether some of these people paid back the cost of their flights. It's about the fact that they were there at all. For example, the Prime Minister's party fundraisers were granted privileged access to high-ranking U.S. officials. Now, that's not a bad deal. Repay the cost of a commercial flight, and you get to meet with connected Washington insiders. But do you know who wasn't there in Washington, Mr. Speaker? Do you know who wasn't there to promote his portfolio? Do you know who wasn't there at the table to promote Canadian businesses? The Natural Resources Minister.
Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Yet again, Mr. Speaker, we see that the members' offices simply do not understand how important the relationship with the United States actually is. How working together across broad portfolios, creating the kind of interactions and strength between our two countries that Canadians rely on every day to move goods and services across the border, to find markets for their produce and products. These are the things that for 10 years the members opposite failed to get done, and that's why we are working hard to grow Canada's economy and friendship with the United States.
The Honourable Member for Outremont. Mr. Speaker, in announcing that the RCMP will be studying the Panama Papers data, which was made public this week, the government has showed that it is serious in its fight against tax evasion. However, when it comes to the 15 multimillionaires who also hid money in tax paradises through KPMG, the Prime Minister is doing everything to not do anything. Can the Prime Minister explain why there's a two-tier system here? Who are the clients and the leaders at KPMG that he is trying to protect? Yeah, right, Honourable Prime Minister. Quite the contrary, Mr. Speaker. We have been very, very clear that we consider that it's essential that all Canadians pay their fair share of taxes, and that's why we increased by $444 million funding in the budget so that the CRA can go after tax evasion and tax avoidance. It was a Liberal who launched this inquiry before committee into KPMG, and that's why we're working very hard to make sure that all Canadians and all companies pay their fair share. The Honourable Member for Outremont.
Actually, it was the NDP that proposed it, and it was voted down by the Liberals. The Panama Papers revealed a vast network of shell companies in offshore tax havens. One Canadian firm, Newport Pacific, created an astonishing 60 companies in known tax havens. The vast majority of these offshore shell companies were set up while the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Heritage worked at Newport Pacific. Has the Prime Minister asked his Parliamentary Secretary if he assisted in the marketing, development or design of any offshore companies in tax havens?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party has been very, very clear that as government we're committed to making sure that all Canadians pay their fair share of taxes and to cut down on avoidance and tax dodging. And the fact is we put $440 million in this latest budget to make sure that the Canada Revenue Agency has the tools to go after tax avoidance and tax evasion. That's something that we're committed to. That's what we're working very, very hard on. That's what we will continue to put forward, regardless of the smears put forward by the members opposite.
For Outremont.
And crickets on his Parliamentary Secretary. Today, the Liberals moved to cut off debate on their omnibus budget bill, something they once deplored when the Conservatives did it, and something they promised never to do. Buried within the bill, amongst changes to 35 other laws, is the cancelling of small business tax cuts the Liberals promised they would keep. The PBO reports today that this broken promise will not only cost small businesses $2.2 billion, it will kill jobs and hurt economic growth. Now that the Prime Minister knows the true cost of his flip-flop, will he do what he promised and reduce the small business tax rate?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, the budget implementation bill contains commitments that we made in our platform. There are very clear commitments in the budget. These are things that we're putting forward that will indeed allow for Canadians to get 9 out of 10 Canadians to get more generous child benefit checks as of January 1st. On top of that, we've allowed for around 20 hours of debate in the first reading of this bill. Second reading of this bill. These are things that are greater proportion disproportionately than any previous government had for the small size of this budget bill. That's it.
The honourable member for Outremont. A number of legal experts have serious concerns about the constitutionality of Bill C-14. The bill is at risk of being contested before the courts, and in committee, the Liberals have rejected almost every amendment to fix this bill. What is the Prime Minister waiting for to refer C-14 to the Supreme Court?
Concerns about the constitutionality of C-14. Why won't the Prime Minister simply refer this bill to the Supreme Court to avoid years of legal challenges?
Prime Minister.
On C-14, Canadians understand that this is an important and big step in our nation's history as we move forward in a delicate issue under a time crunch by the Supreme Court. One of the things that Canadians expect is that we take this very seriously and responsibly, and that's exactly what we're doing before committee. That's what we've been doing with these consultations. The NDP has put forward amendments to enlarge the scope of the allowances. The Conservatives putting forward amendments to further restrict it. We are listening to all proposals. We're working hard to make sure that Canadians have the right legal framework to help them with these incredibly personal and sensitive decisions.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has made his choices. When he went to Washington, to the White House, he chose who was going to be there with him. He chose the Liberal Party president and their chief fundraiser. However, the Minister of Natural Resources, who should have been there, was left behind here in Ottawa. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a very simple question for the Prime Minister. Can he give me one reason, just one good reason, why he preferred to bring their bagman but left the Minister of Natural Resources at home? The Honourable Government House Leader, as I said yesterday, and as the Prime Minister has said several times, we are proud of what was accomplished in Washington at that historic visit. I would like to remind my colleague that this is the first time since 1997 that Canada has been invited to a state dinner at the White House. There are certain people who were invited by the White House, and as I've said to my colleague yesterday, he knows very well that all of the expenses associated with their participation were reimbursed. The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Canadians are not proud to see that when they're at the White House with the Prime Minister, it's just the guy who raises money for the Liberal Party who's there and not senior ministers whose duty and responsibility would be to be there, Mr. Speaker. The member for Papineau is acting like a leader of the Liberal Party and not as Prime Minister to all Canadians. I'll offer him the opportunity to explain. Can he give one good reason why the guy who raises money for his party was there, but not an important senior minister for all Canadians? The Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, speaking about senior ministers who were part of the delegation, my colleague knows very well that they discussed with a number of files with their American counterparts, including climate change, the environment and energy, international security, defense cooperation, and the World Coalition Against ISIS, as well as trans-border cooperation, as well as international trade. Mr. Speaker, it was a pretty full agenda, and we're proud of what was accomplished.
Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is the Prime Minister's friends and family enjoyed a weekend of VIP access, sipping champagne with the Washington elite. Meanwhile, ministers, like the Minister of Natural Resources, were left off the guest list. We know the guest list was submitted by the Liberals. That's why family members and party executives were part of the delegation. Why were Liberal insiders and family brought along instead of actual government decision makers?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I draw my colleagues' attention to the answer the Prime Minister just gave in terms of the family members who were invited directly by President Obama in addition to the official delegation. She should reflect on that answer. The Prime Minister gave a very precise answer to her exact question, but she talks about the delegation, Mr. Speaker. The delegation, comprised of many senior ministers, engaged their American counterparts, as I said, on issues as important to Canadians as climate change, trade, energy, environment. Mr. Speaker, we made progress on something as important, Mr. Speaker, on pre-clearance.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
The Minister of Natural Resources sat at home while the Liberal Party bagman wined and dined with U.S. cabinet ministers. The Minister of Natural Resources sat at home while the Liberal Party president mixed and mingled with the senators. The government had a chance to use this event to build energy relationships, but they wasted it. Isn't the reason he brought friends and family instead of the Natural Resource Minister because the Liberals want to shut down the energy industry?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, what utter nonsense. 400,000 people move back and forth across the Canada-U.S. border every day. $2.4 billion in trade moves back and forth across that border every day. We have to make that border secure, and we have to make it efficient for the movement of people and goods. We negotiated and concluded an agreement on pre-clearance, which they worked on for 5 years and couldn't get it done. We finished it, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, that was fun, folks. Now, let's settle down. That's right, it's not even Wednesday. No, and it's a time of year, and we have lots of school students in the chamber, in the galleries. Let's keep that in mind and show good behavior. And now let's listen to the honourable member for Edmonton Riverbend.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We apparently have got under the honourable member's skin, it seems, the last few days. However, today I'd like to talk about Fort McMurray. It'll be a while before the people of Fort McMurray can return to their homes. Despite the disaster, rebuilding plans have already begun. However, the Prime Minister has left almost no wiggle room in his fiscal plan to help fund the rebuilding efforts. Will the Liberals change their infrastructure plan to rebuild Fort McMurray?
Honourable Minister of Infrastructure and Communities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was back home in Alberta along with my colleague from Edmonton Centre and the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness to see firsthand and meet with families who have been impacted by these wildfires and see the generosity and the compassion of Canadians towards them and helping them and standing shoulder to shoulder with them in this time of need. Mr. Speaker, we are with Alberta today, we will be with them tomorrow and well into the future as we rebuild Fort McMurray.
Member for Edmonton Riverbend.
So I guess that means there's no money, Mr. Speaker. In their latest unethical fundraising email, the Liberals used the devastating fires of Fort McMurray to fundraise for their party. While Canadians across the country have unselfishly given over $60 million to help Albertans, Liberals are raising money for themselves. Why is this Prime Minister begging for donations on the backs of Canadians who just lost their home?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians have rallied to this cause with enormous generosity. They have responded to the human needs that are so apparent in Fort McMurray, and they've done so with a great Canadian human spirit. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, the Government of Canada is providing support through the Department of National Defence, the RCMP, Transport Canada, the Innovation Department, Health Canada, Natural Resources Canada, Public Services Canada, the Interagency on Firefighting, the CRA, and Employment Insurance, Mr. Speaker, and that doesn't even get to the important question of DFA.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi, Bay James Nunavik, EU. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday and today, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs reiterated the government's intention to apply the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But when it comes time to saying how they're going to do that, she's giving no details. However, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that the work has already been done. My bill specifically calls for the adoption and the implementation of the declaration. So the question is very simple. Will the government support Bill C-262? And yes or no would be enough.
The Honourable Permanent Secretary for Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, today is a historic day as the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs is speaking in New York at the United Nations, outlining that we will remove any objections that we've had to the United Nations designation of Indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, our support to the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People is a part of advancing our commitment to Indigenous.
The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Well, Mr. Speaker, today is indeed a historic day because this is a day the government has to implement Jordan's principle or be found in contempt of the Human Rights Tribunal. Now, I've just returned from Attawapiskat, and I can tell this House how badly needed those resources for Jordan principle are, to hire the child mental health workers, to augment the child and family services. And yet the budget came and went with $0 for Jordan's principle, and so the Human Rights Tribunal has called the government out. So, will they meet the deadline of the Human Rights Tribunal, and will they flow the money? And if so, when will it start to flow? Because the children can't wait any longer.
Hear, hear.
Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, the work that is going on currently in the community of Attawapiskat is an excellent example of how our government is responding to the principles behind Jordan's principle, in that we are working across jurisdictions. There is no question of whose responsibility it is. We are all working together. The federal government is working alongside the provincial government, is working alongside First Nations leadership to make sure that the needs of the community are met in the immediate phase. We are also working together to make sure that we develop long-term sustainable solutions for these communities.
Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, the people of Fort McMurray are wondering when they can return to their homes or what's left of them. They want to go back to their jobs if they still have them. Oil companies have cut production, small businesses have shut down, and self-employed contractors are left wondering what's next. While the Premier is meeting with oil companies today to discuss getting production back online, the Natural Resources Minister is, quote, having conversations in Ottawa. When will Albertans see real support for energy sector workers?
Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, over the last 24 hours, I have had conversations with the ministers of forestry and energy in the government of Alberta, and I've spoken to several chief executive officers of major oil companies in Fort McMurray. They all report how satisfied they have been with the cooperation of governments and industry to make sure that people would have been returned to their homes safely, and miraculously that's the case. They also report to me that production is now restarting, and they expect it will be done in an orderly and timely way.
For Lakeland.
Without a doubt, the oil sands companies, workers, and all the people around Fort McMurray and across Alberta have done amazing work to support them during this tragedy. And it could be weeks or months before residents of Fort McMurray can get home and get back to work. They've shown they're Alberta strong, but that doesn't pay the bills. Yesterday, the Minister of Natural Resources said his government is, quote, responding to that reality. Can the Minister tell Canadians exactly how this government has responded to the job losses caused by the fire?
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, we have responded in the first place in the most important of all ways, and that is to guarantee the safety of those who were evacuated from their homes, to minimize damage to infrastructure, to keep an ongoing conversation with those who are running these industries to make sure that their infrastructure is protected so that when this tragic incident passes, we'll be well positioned to rebuild the sector, which is in the interests of all members of this House.
Member for Richmond Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' decision to increase the small business tax rate is proving worse and worse.
Broken promise.
Last week, I asked why the Liberals broke their promise to our small businesses. This broken promise will cost the industry $2.2 billion.
Unbelievable.
Why do the Liberals continue to abandon our hard-working small business owners?
Honourable Minister of Small Business and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On January 1st, the tax rate for small businesses was reduced. And today, the Parliamentary Budget Officer confirms that the decision to maintain the reduced business tax rate was the right one. The report confirms that the previous government's approach would have created just over 1,000 jobs at a cost of almost $2.1 billion to the economy, with no growth to the economy. So it's important that we support our small and medium-sized businesses. I am here to make sure that they are productive, more innovative, and export-oriented. We'll continue to do the work that we are doing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Richmond Centre.
Mr. Speaker, well, I wish Liberals understood small businesses.
They don't.
But the facts just don't support that. No clue. A report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer today indicated that in addition to the $2.2 billion cost to the industry, the changes to the small business tax rate will actually cost jobs. Wow. Mr. Speaker, when will the Liberals stop punishing small businesses?
Yes. Honourable Minister of Small Business and Tourism.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Budget Officer for offering his projections to Canadians and parliamentarians. In a previous report, the Budget Officer's verdict was that our budget as a whole would have significant positive impact on the Canadian economy and create tens of thousands of jobs. As a whole, Budget 2016 proposes targeted investments totaling $50.2 billion. Small business is implicit throughout the entire budget. Small businesses are the backbone of the economy. They are our job creators, and we support small business. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Esquimalt, Saanich Sooke.
During the election, the Liberals promised to add gender identity to the Human Rights Code and to the hate crime section of the Criminal Code. In February, the Minister of Justice told us she would introduce legislation to protect gender identity and gender expression. Last week, the urgent need for these protections was underlined when the Montreal clinic performing gender affirmation surgery, the only such clinic in Canada, was targeted by arson. The need is urgent. Will the government bring forward this legislation now to help prevent these kinds of hate crimes in the future?
Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the honourable colleague across the way for his tireless advocacy with respect to gender identity. Our government is committed to bringing forward legislation that will respect and ensure that we eliminate discrimination in all forms in this country. Legislation will be coming forward very shortly.
The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, what happened last week at the Metropolitan Centre of Plastic Surgery, the only centre that does gender reassignment surgery for transgender persons in Canada, is simply shocking. The discrimination and the violence against trans people persists, and the government has a duty to act. The Liberals had promised to protect trans people's rights, but we are still waiting for the bill. So, our question is, when exactly will the government table this bill?
Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to reiterate that our government is committed to helping ensure that all Canadians feel protected from discrimination. This includes protecting transgendered people and from discrimination and hate propaganda. We will be bringing forward legislation in this matter in the very near future, and I would look to all members of this House to support us in moving that forward.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Mr. Speaker, the world has made remarkable progress in the fight against HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria, largely thanks to the support of partners like the Global Fund. We are at a turning point, and the next generation could be the first to live in a world free of these three illnesses. The actions we take today are important for our children's future. Can the Minister of International Development and the Francophonie tell this House what Canada intends to do to maintain the momentum in the fight against these illnesses? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I also thank my colleague from Thérèse de Blainville for his question. Yesterday, the Prime Minister announced that we are going to welcome in September the conference on the reconstituting the Global Fund. This is an important organization that intends to put an end to HIV and tuberculosis and malaria. Our investment will be $750 million over 3 years, and that's an increase of 30% compared to the previous commitment, and will allow for the saving of 8 million lives.
Mr. Speaker, we know the Minister of Transport met with Air Canada at least 4 times in the month before introducing his Air Canada Act bill. At committee, he stated that Air Canada aircraft maintenance was never discussed. However, 2 days later, Air Canada's CEO said that his company always raises the issue of the Air Canada Public Participation Act, including maintenance, during meetings with the government. Why is the Minister of Transport misleading Canadians?
You're here.
The Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, Air Canada is a large airline in this country, and I meet frequently with them to discuss a range of issues, and I will continue to meet with them in the coming years over all the issues that are important to our airlines. I spoke at the committee. I answered the questions that my honourable colleague asked me about maintenance, which is a very important part of the costs of an airline, and the fact that the modification to the law that we made will give more flexibility to Air Canada to compete in this very competitive field. Thank you.
Member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the truth is that the minister continues to play with the facts by insisting that all the parties affected by this legislation are delighted with it. That's simply not true. The Quebec government has asked for a delay in this legislation. And yesterday in committee, the Deputy Premier of Manitoba stated, and I quote, C-10 jumps the gun. Why does the minister keep coming up short when explaining the urgent need for this legislation?
Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, as we all know, the government of Manitoba came to an agreement with Air Canada about 6 weeks ago, and this was announced. Air Canada would create 150 quality jobs in Manitoba beginning in 2017, and the government of Manitoba said that they would drop their litigation with Air Canada. I've said this a large number of times. We recognize the importance of Manitoba's aerospace industry. We are growing this economy. Canada has the 5th largest aerospace sector in the world. We are committed to improving it, and we will do so.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, this government is not governing. The only thing they're doing is gaining time. In the case of Bombardier, they told us that they would be announcing their intention before the budget, and afterwards they said, wait for the budget and you'll see. Well, 50 days after the budget was tabled, we've not seen nothing yet. This government likes to talk a lot about transparency. So, Mr. Speaker, can we finally see the agreement?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, Bombardier is a strong Canadian company, and that is why we're engaged with the company on a solution that we want to focus on jobs, on R&D, and keeping the head office here in Canada, Mr. Speaker. And that is why we're making sure that we're engaged with them in a manner to also set them up for success in the long term, because they're important to the Canadian economy, to the aerospace sector, to the supplier base, the 950 suppliers, the 180,000 jobs that are in that sector, and the $29 billion they contribute to our national economy. We'll continue to remain engaged with the company, Mr. Speaker. It is a priority of this government.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about solutions. It would have been so easy for this government to demonstrate some tangible support for Bombardier. One way, among others, to support the company would have been to help it add to its order book. Porter Airlines was ready to buy 30 C-Series jets. Why did the Minister of Transport say no to the extension of the runway at Billy Bishop Airport? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Thank you for the question. I have often given the answer to that question. We have made the promise in the last election to the people of Toronto to make a balance, find a balance between commercial pressure and the quality of life for those living along the shores of Lake Ontario. We maintained our promise not to reopen the tripartite agreement, and we have kept our promise, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, getting more women elected and having a more representative parliament is a goal we all share. While this parliament set a new record, women still have only 26% of the seats in this House. At this rate, it will take over 60 years to achieve equality. I have tabled the Candidate Gender Equity Act to take a concrete step forward. Will the government support getting my bill to committee and work with us so together we can take another step for gender equality? Thank you.
Honourable Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the honourable member's efforts. We take note of his private member's bill and will study it on its merits when it is debated in this House. This government supports the idea of more women and people of various genders participating in the political debate in this country. This is clearly a commitment that this government and this Prime Minister have shown, and we look forward to continuing the leadership on this front.
Member for North Island, Powell River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Liberal government is closing the Comox Marine Communications and Traffic Services Centre today. This was a bad plan when the Conservatives hatched it, and after hearing damning evidence during the Fisheries Committee study, the minister should have seen reason and cancelled the closure. Comox is central to BC's emergency response planning. This government said it would make decisions based on evidence. So why is the minister ignoring evidence and putting the lives and the BC coast at risk?
Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a member pointed out, today, at the end of the day today, Victoria will be delivering the services that were previously offered at Comox. Mr. Speaker, I have full confidence in the Coast Guard will be able to continue provide a full set of essential services at the location. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the employees. I know consolidation has created challenges for them. I would like to personally thank the individuals that have chose to stay on and relocate to another location, and also like to thank the members who chose to leave further.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 6 months since the Minister of Justice was appointed, and in that time the Minister has found plenty of time to attend pay-to-play fundraisers, but hasn't found the time to appoint a single judge. This at a time when our courts face an unprecedented backlog, and all the Minister can say is she'll get around to it. So, when will the Minister stop fundraising and start appointing desperately needed judges?
Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the member for the question with respect to judicial appointments. I recognize the importance of making appointments to the judiciary across the country and doing that based on merit, based on diversity, and we are entering into a comprehensive process to do that. Having said that, I do recognize that there are a number of positions that need to be filled in the very immediate future, and we are undertaking a quick process in order to be able to do that.
For St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has to understand the urgency in appointing judges, and yet the Minister hasn't even figured out the process, let alone appointed a single judge. The Minister is creating a crisis because of her own apathy. How backlogged do the Liberals want the courts to be? When will the Minister stop going AWOL and start doing her job?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are committed to ensuring that we make substantive and thoughtful appointments to the judiciary. I will ensure and am committed to engaging with stakeholders, including the judiciary, on these appointments. We are committed to a review of the judicial appointment process based on the principles of openness, transparency, merit, and diversity, and I will ensure that we move forward with these appointments within a time frame that recognizes the needs of the courts.
Member for South Surrey, White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minimum sentences for convicted drug traffickers who target kids under the age of 18 was recently overturned by the BC Court of Appeal. Mr. Speaker, our youth need to be protected from drug traffickers who directly target them. Are the Liberals prepared to challenge this ruling?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have been tasked by the Prime Minister to do and undertake a comprehensive review of the criminal justice system, including sentencing reform. We are moving forward with this review, engaging with stakeholders, engaging with experts in this area to ensure that we provide that overall review, which hasn't been done for many, many years, and we will be reviewing the mandatory minimum penalties and sentences, certainly recognizing that there is a need to punish the more serious crimes while ensuring that we maintain that sentences are appropriate and in line with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Member for Hamilton West and Castor Dundas.
Mr. Speaker, for the past 2 weeks, representatives of the International Monetary Fund were in Canada as part of their annual consultations under IMF Article 4. The staff of the IMF were here to survey the economic landscape and look forward to Canada's future economic development. Could the Minister of Finance please share his thoughts on the IMF consultations with this House?
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member from Hamilton West, Ancaster Dundas, for her question. I was pleased to meet with the staff from the IMF last week and to receive their report, which praised our pro-growth fiscal measures. We are tremendously proud of the path that we're on, and we're very pleased that the international community is recognizing what we're doing here in Canada as having a real and measurable impact. We're looking forward to continue to work with the international community on inclusive growth, both here and abroad, to make a real difference for Canadians and our world.
Here, here. For Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, last month UNESCO, which is supposed to be a body dedicated to historical fact, held a bizarre vote. UNESCO's executive board voted overwhelmingly for an offensive resolution denying Jewish history and Israel's ties to Jerusalem's Temple Mount and the Western Wall. Only 6 states, including the United States and the United Kingdom, voted against. Now, Canada isn't a member of UNESCO's executive board, but we haven't heard a peep from the Liberals condemning this outrageous vote. Why not?
Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is strongly supporting Israel, strongly fighting against anti-Semitism on every front, and never Canada will do something else than that. It's something that we are very committed to do in every circumstance.
Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Liberals voted against an NDP motion to solve the dye-filtered milk issue immediately. Instead, and with no lack of pride, the government announced that they would consult the dairy producers in the next 30 days. That's $18 million the industry has lost, Mr. Speaker. Another consultation, zero in terms of action and commitments to really solve this issue. Can the minister tell us and reassure the producers and commit to solving this problem in the 25 remaining days? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate my honourable colleague's question and concern. And we recognize the importance of this emotional issue for the dairy farmers. And we're working to reach sustainable solutions for the whole of the Canadian dairy sector. We will work with the dairy sector, and we will come up with a solution to this issue, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Mr. Speaker, Halifax and Dartmouth have welcomed the Prime Minister and numerous ministers since January. We've witnessed a new level of respect for Atlantic Canada from our government. This government understands that Atlantic Canada is a culture of hard work and innovation. In fact, the Finance Minister kicked off his pre-budget consultations in Nova Scotia. Can the Minister please tell us about the positive change this budget brings to middle-class Nova Scotian families?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member from Dartmouth Cole Harbour for his question. I was pleased to be able to go to Nova Scotia to start our pre-budget consultations. Coming from a province where they have a huge number of universities, we know that our investment in research infrastructure and universities will make a difference in Nova Scotia. Budget 2016 is a bold plan. It's going to help middle-class families and those struggling to join the middle class. Efforts like the Canada Child Benefit, the top-up to the GIS, they'll help families in Dartmouth Cole Harbour, and they'll help families across Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, Dieudonné Mbala was found guilty several times of hate speech, of defamation, of incitement to terrorism. Tonight, he is supposed to perform a so-called comedy show in Montreal. Very simple question. Did the government use the powers it has to prevent his entering into Canada? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
When an individual presents themselves at the border to enter into Canada, they are examined by the Border Services Agency. The professional officers of that agency take all relevant factors into account, including the existence of a criminal record.
The honourable member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, Equiterre and the David Suzuki Foundation support the petition against Energy East. Like the UPA and millions of Quebecers, they are rightly expressing their opposition to this pipeline project, which is dangerous for our land and our waterways. Unfortunately, the Liberal government is turning a deaf ear and a blind eye to this growing opposition to Energy East at home. Will the 40 Quebec MPs on the government side continue to represent TransCanada, or will they defend the interests of Quebecers?
Natural resources.
Mr. Speaker, the application to build the Energy East pipeline has not yet been lodged with the regulator, the National Energy Board. There will be many months of public discussion when the honourable member will be encouraged to appear in front of the board, to write a letter, to go onto a website, to have conversations with the community about her attitude about whether or not that pipeline is in the national interest. To ask the government to offer an opinion before it's before the regulator, Mr. Speaker, is irresponsible.
The honourable member for Pierre Boucher des Patriotes Verchères. Mr. Speaker, the Quebec Federation of Chambers of Commerce and its 60,000 business members are asking the government to eliminate tax unfairness that penalizes those selling their businesses to their families rather than to strangers. Our business people have had enough of seeing Ottawa undermine the future of Quebec family businesses. Quebec has already solved this injustice. If Quebec was independent, the problem would not be complicated. It would already have been dealt with. The question is to know if a single one of the members among the 40 Quebec MPs will rise and defend the request of our business people. The Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we know that it is very important to have a tax system that works. We think that our system does work now for people in Quebec and for people across the country. We will be reviewing the tax system over the next years as we had announced in the 2016 budget. And with this review, we will consider the measures that are important for the tax system in Canada.
Period for today. I have a point of order from the honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou.
Mr. Speaker, this morning, the Leader of the Opposition in the House moved a motion to take steps with respect to Bill C-15 and to remove the Canadian Forces and Veterans measures. The members opposite said no, so therefore I would say that notwithstanding any standing or special order or usual practice of the House, Bill C-15, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on March 22nd, 2016, and other measures be divided into two bills, namely Bills C-15A and C-15B as follows. 1. Bill C-15A shall contain all of the provisions of the bill respecting the Canadian Forces Members and Veterans Re-establishment and Compensation Act to, among other things, A. Replace permanent impairment allowance with career impact allowance. B. Replace